presented by COVID-19. Clearly, COVID-19 has resulted in a profound impact across the economy with unprecedented speed. Figures from the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection indicate that it had issued payments to 591,000 people in respect of their application for the COVID-19 pandemic unemployment payment and 36,100 in receipt of COVID-19 illness benefits up to Tuesday last, the 28th of April. These payments are in addition to the 212,000 people on the live register on the 20th of April. Over 50,000 businesses have now registered for the government's temporary wage subsidy scheme, with over 400,000 employees receiving payment under the scheme. These figures reflect the impact of closures across the economy, with those sectors most dependent on public footfall, such as recreation, tourism and hospitality, and other service-orientated sectors being closed. As a result of COVID-19, we have gone from a position where we had full employment in this country just 2 months ago, with more people at work than ever before, to a position today where we now have over 1 million people in receipt of income support of some form. While there are large parts of the economy and society that have ceased activities, I think that we should remember that there are significant parts of our economy and business sector that have continued to operate and implement the physical distancing guidelines. These sectors continue to operate safely, include the essential retail sector, from supermarkets to pharmacies and filling stations, large parts of manufacturing and financial services, ICT, energy and communication sectors, and other sectors such as transport and freight and waste management. My department has put a range of business supports in place, including a €450 million COVID-19 working capital scheme from the SBCI, which supports loans from €25,000 up to €1.5 million. Almost 2,000 applications have already been received under that scheme, which demonstrates the strong appetite for working capital amongst businesses. Loans of up to €50,000 are available for small businesses from Microfinance Ireland, with the first 6 months interest and repayment free. And as of the 28th of April, 321 applications had been received. 186 of these have been approved to a value of €5.2 million, and a further 71 applications are in progress. An additional €200 million is also being made available to the Future Growth Loan Scheme for COVID-19. A €180 million Sustaining Enterprise Fund. Enterprise Ireland and the IDA have access to this fund. They provide for financial support of up to €800,000 for manufacturing and internationally traded services firms. The Business Continuity Grant of €2,500 run by the local enterprise offices are for businesses across every sector that employ up to 50 people. There have been almost 3,000 applications for that scheme to date, so it is proving hugely popular with small businesses. Grant aid of up to €5,000 is now available through the local enterprise offices to help businesses get online and continue trading during COVID-19. In addition, a new €2 million online retail scheme is open to retailers employing over 10 people to support companies in the indigenous retail sector. Grants of between €10,000 and €40,000 are available under that scheme. A COVID-19 business financial planning grant of €5,000 is available through Enterprise Ireland to help companies develop a robust financial plan. A new lean business continuity grant of €2,500 is available for training or advisory services supports related to the continued operation of businesses during this pandemic. It is open to small, medium or large client companies of Enterprise Ireland or Údarás na Gaeltachta. In addition to these new supports, it is important also to remember the full range of existing Enterprise Ireland, IDA, Local Enterprise Office and Údarás na Gaeltachta grant and advisory supports continue to be available to businesses. As I mentioned earlier, the wage subsidy scheme has proven very successful. Over 50,000 businesses have now registered, with over 400,000 employers receiving payment under the scheme. That's 400,000 more people who are staying connected with their employer and they're still in a job. I've engaged with the business representative groups in relation to the scheme, and I know that there were some anomalies at the start, and in fairness, Revenue have shown great flexibility in listening to those concerns and indeed responding to them. So it doesn't matter whether your business is open or closed, as long as you can demonstrate that you have had a 25% impact reduction on your turnover, you are eligible to apply for it. It's important to remember as well that the pandemic unemployment payment of €350 is also available to the self-employed, which is important. And I know for some small businesses where the wage subsidy scheme may not have been suitable, the PUP payment has been a vital support for them. Sometimes it's hard to believe that COVID-19 has only been with us for 2 months. The world has changed and the economic landscape in Ireland has utterly changed. We have put a number of supports in place to help businesses deal with the initial shock of COVID-19. More will be needed, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. And as a Minister, I want to ensure that businesses are supported throughout this crisis. And as I've said before, it's about providing the right support at the right time. And as a government, we will continue to develop and adapt our suite of supports as the situation develops. And I'm working with Minister Donoghue and with colleagues across government in terms of the next stage of our response for businesses. Turning to the question of relaxing restrictions, the Government has made it clear that the #1 imperative is to ensure public health. We are dealing with a deadly virus, so the relaxation of restrictions must be carried out in line with public health guidance, be prudently introduced on a phased basis over time, and while ensuring safe practices backed up by guidance and, where necessary, enforcement. We have seen businesses quickly change practices, for example, contactless deliveries, so businesses can adjust in a safe way, provided there is rigorous adherence to public health guidelines. And I want to thank all those in these sectors for the sacrifices they make every day to sustain essential services and for their rigorous adherence to physical distancing guidelines. And that's why I and my department are focusing specifically on helping businesses to understand what physical distancing involves in the workplace. We have worked with the National Standards Authority of Ireland, that's an agency within my department, and the HSE to produce 2 protocols and guides for manufacturing industry and the retail sector on workplace protection and improvement. These guides set out a range of measures, including staggering of start times, shift work, and I would encourage all businesses, whether they are open or not, to familiarise themselves with these protocols. Every employer has obligations to their staff and to the public to ensure that all necessary measures are being taken to adhere to the public health advice and recommendations in their workplaces. The Health and Safety Authority under my department is working closely with the Department of Health and the HSE to set out clear COVID-19 specific guidance for safe workplaces, which all businesses must adhere to when they are allowed to reopen. And I expect these to be available very shortly. These will not only be backed up by further advice at sector level over time, but also through inspections and enforcement using the full suite of resources available across the state. If a company or an employee has a question, the Health and Safety Authority already offer advice and support and can be contacted in this regard. I know that the question of when we can begin to lift the current restrictions and start getting things back to normal is on the minds of many people and indeed to the forefront of many business owners and leaders across the country. As the Taoiseach has said, the Government continues to consider the broad range of public health, societal and economic impacts and options for lifting the current restrictions. And I would like to stress that the unwinding of restrictions will have to be gradual and proceed over a number of months. I want to assure workers and employers that this Government is committed to ensuring that as the economy reopens, we will do everything that we reasonably can to save those businesses that are viable. As we unwind restrictions, we must do so in a way which supports our longer-term economic prospects. Sectoral issues are being worked on at official level across relevant government departments. We must also be mindful of the need to focus on economic recovery, an issue that I expect to be the fore of any new government's agenda. These are difficult, unprecedented days for businesses in Ireland. The task ahead of us to recover is monumental. But it is because of the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit that we have in Ireland that we have reason to be positive. Absolute Nutrition, a small food company in Rathcoole, have increased their sales by over 200% during COVID-19 through online sales. Gunpowder Gin and Drumshanbo, a household name, are now making hand sanitizer. And only yesterday I was at Combi-Lift in my own county of Monaghan, and they have now come up with a unique device which can split ventilators. It is that ability of businesses to respond and adapt which will be crucial in the weeks and months ahead. And I'm determined that we will continue to support businesses and ensure that as many people as possible will have jobs to return to, with employers who have businesses that will succeed in the future. So remember, we had a strong economy before the pandemic. We must do everything now in our power to ensure that we have a strong economy after the pandemic, and I look forward to hearing Deputy's views on this. Thank you.
Thanks for that statement. Minister, I want to call you as well to move the motion. While it was moved, the motion on the quorum, it wasn't agreed by the House. Can you move, please?
Yeah, I move.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agreed. We move on now to the questions. And say again, Minister, is there a copy of your speech? Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Minister. Now, to Fianna Fáil spokespeople, you have 15 minutes, and I believe you're sharing it, roughly splitting it evenly. Okay.
Myself, Deputy McCharry and Deputy Collins. Minister, last night Dr Sam McGonkey on The Tonight Show reaffirmed the importance of a strong economy to maintain a strong public health system. COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon, and we must examine how the economy can coexist while not compromising the health of our citizens. The government's attempts to blame any further extension to the lockdown on the public for non-compliance, I think, is deeply unfair. The vast majority of the public understand their responsibilities. I think we have to start looking at how we can reopen sectors where social distance already exists. If you look at the example of garden centres, they are prevented from opening, yet still Lidl and Aldi continue to sell similar produce. Deeply unfair. The roadmap needs to be published to give certainty. Certain businesses will need time to make necessary changes, and we need to know what financial supports are going to be there for the businesses to make changes. Chambers Ireland said this morning that 1 in 4 businesses will need to spend €8,000 making the necessary modifications. Part of any roadmap must include a task force. A task force must be populated with expert membership that can advise on a sector-by-sector basis. Because, Minister, for every further week that government fails to act will require further subsidies in the long run and making it much harder for businesses to survive. And the announcements to date by government are simply inadequate. They're inadequate in terms of their structure, and they're inadequate in terms of their size. 95% of government supports are reliant and based on businesses taking on further debt. And the uptake to date has been very slow. You mentioned figures in your own speech, Minister, and when you compare that to the number of people who are availing of the temporary wage subsidy, it is very, very low. What businesses are asked to do, businesses who have seen their turnover radically reduced or even eliminated, government is saying to them, take on further debt at 4.5%, while government themselves are currently borrowing at less than 1/4%. So we're trying to make 4.25% margin on the back of struggling businesses. You're going to have to look at what other European countries are doing, how they are availing of relaxed state aid rules to ensure that they directly inject liquidity into sustainable businesses. I want to ask about business interruption insurance policy. At an earlier briefing that I attended in your department, Minister, you indicated that you would be meeting the CEOs of the insurance companies. Has that happened? And if so, what was the response? What actions are you and the Finance Minister taking to ensure that legitimate policyholders who have business interruption insurance due to infectious diseases, that they are going to be received payout? A hairdresser was on a radio show the other day. There's no clear path to how she will reopen. There's no clear how she can conduct her business with maintaining social distance requirements. And yet still, insurance companies are expecting her to pay public liability insurance. A trade credit scheme, Minister. In my mind, this is a major impediment to the resumption of normal trade, because suppliers will be reluctant to offer credit under the current circumstances. I believe a government-backed trade credit system will be needed to ensure confidence is there. Both France and Germany have already made applications to the EU Commission to ensure that they can provide a government-backed trade credit scheme, and I wonder what our intentions are in relation to that. Commercial leases. Large institutional investors are putting the squeeze on businesses. What action are the government going to take to ensure this ceases? So to wrap up, Minister, can you say when will we have a clear roadmap? When will we have a task force? When will we review the penal conditions that are attached to the liquidity supports that are available from your department? Will we see grants? Will we see interest-free loans? Will you confirm about your meeting to the CEO of the insurance companies? And finally, will you commit to explore the introduction of a government-backed trade credit scheme?
Deputy McSharry.
Thanks very much, Corla. Minister, thanks for the opportunity to say a few words. Again, I'm very conscious I'm one of the very few that have had the opportunity to do this. At the outset, I want to express our thanks as a party to all people in front line, not just in the health service, but those manning supermarkets, filling stations, doing deliveries, manufacturing and so on, for our eternal credit and appreciation to their efforts. Can I ask you, Minister, in your response that you might address, what is the situation in Europe at the moment? Has there been discussions, for example, upon a mechanism being adopted to shelve, park, warehouse, whatever terminology you wish to use, the entire cost of this process? Obviously, it will be in the many hundreds of billions internationally. Certainly in the context here of Ireland, it will be in the tens of billions. What's absolutely essential is that whatever outcome or mechanism is identified, one needs to be, because this country cannot look ahead to another lost decade in terms of austerity to underpin measures that are going to need to be taken to underpin our economy. So where are we in a European context in terms of agreement? Where are the Germans and Dutch in particularly upon agreeing a mechanism? Because we're going to have to embrace mechanisms similar to the Marshall Plan in 1948 and indeed the London Agreements of the 1950s in terms of write-down of debts and considerations in that regard, if we are going to be equipped, either your government outgoing or any new government that may be formed, to take the sorts of measures that are going to be supportive of people and supportive of business and supportive of employment and looking after the social supports we will need to continue for those unable to, to look after themselves. Because we won't be able to do it if we're looking at austerity as the only way of achieving it. Can I also say I'm choosing to use my time to pool a number of questions, Lasky and Corla, and then the Minister can respond rather than us being in and out of it, just waste time. Can I also ask, in terms of the sorts of supports that are going to be considered from a business perspective, we're going to have to look at the sunken costs that many businesses, in fact all businesses, are facing at the moment, be that utilities, be it insurance, be it security, be it IT, be it others. In order to stand still, there are substantial costs. Those costs are going to have to be dealt with by way of direct grant aid. We cannot strangle the business community with debt that they can't manage and just feel that we've dealt with it. So there is going to be an element, call it helicopter money, call it direct grant aid, call it free money, whatever you like. Sorry, what? Yeah, and I get 5.
Questions and answers.
And I get 5.
That's right, for questions and answers.
Well, the Minister can log those answers.
Okay.
Again, I'm conscious that I have very limited time. The Minister's going to have a lot more speaking time than me in the future, so if she can't answer them here as we speak during my time, she can do it during her own time, perhaps to the media outside.
The order of
but in any event, no, I know that. So I'm being creative with the order, and we're wasting each other's time. Sorry, Lasky and Corla.
You're eating into your colleague's time.
No, he'll have 5 minutes too. as I understand it. So those sunken costs are going to be something. And then in terms of working capital, like my colleague has said, interest-free loans. That's where you need to be at. This thing of laundering it through the SBCI with their innovation clause, expecting viable businesses to be able to reinvent the wheel in order to get money at 5% because the costs have to be paid to the pillar banks who are going to get it out there. So if it's less than 0.25%, it needs to be that for working capital money for businesses. Can I also ask, in terms of the 350, which is currently being paid to businesses, how long can people expect that? Because a lot of businesses feel until such time as we're back up and running, it needs to be maintained. Also, there are going to be redundancies. That is a matter of fact. So how are they going to be funded? Can we get back to the 60% that was once given, or closer to 100% to assist with that? Because not all people are going to be able to get back into full employment immediately. Obviously, in a border constituency, like your own indeed, Minister, tourism and agriculture represent a huge part of our economy. So where are we on a plan for those sectors? Because nothing has been forthcoming and there's a huge amount of concern. I have 37 seconds left. Thanks, Giancola. To conclude, can I ask, and while I appreciate it's an issue of health, the public need to know what's happening because it might inform ourselves and indeed expert opinion about how to manage the way out. What are the demographics of the people being sick? What are the demographics of those who have deceased? What locations of the country are those happening in? Because it's very clear anecdotally that there are flashpoints.
Thanks, Deputy.
And I think we need clear detail and data being provided by government so that people can be informed, experts, ourselves as members of the House, to advise you on what decisions to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, at the outset of the pandemic, the focus was rightly on the medical and the health response, and of course that to buffer financially families and workers. And I think it's fair to say a lot of the critique and the narrative has followed on from that. What are we doing for SMEs? And I think the message that I'm getting, and I'm sure others are getting, is that largely SMEs feel enough isn't being done for them. Because people have rightly had the opportunity to sign up to the COVID payment and to the wage subsidy scheme, but the employers, the SMEs, the people who hope to take these people back to get their businesses open, feel that enough is not being done for them and that they are being left behind in relation to this. And I think it's critically important because if you look at the Limerick and the Midwest region where I come from, we have 55,000 people who signed up to the COVID payment. 22,000 of those come from Limerick alone. And if you had a single employer in Limerick employing 10 or 15,000 people, like we had with Dáil back in the day, which closed, there would be an immediate response to that employer direct. So more needs to be done. Your COVID business tracker support, which is available from your department, shows that about 2,300 SMEs have availed of various supports. But that's a shockingly low number out of the total number of SMEs in the country, which we know is well in excess of 100,000 SMEs. So I think we have to have more focus in relation to the employers. The central bank tells us that SMEs are going to need 2.4 billion over the next 3 months. What are they going to need beyond that? We have to look at SMEs through two sets of lenses. What do we do for them to get them through the COVID period, and what do we do to reboot, to kick-start them after the crisis is over and the pandemic hopefully has gone away? And that is a huge job of work. The point has to be made that the funding which is available from Europe, whether it's through the European Investment Bank or the European Central Bank or any other avenues of funding, which we're told the state is getting at a zero or a very low cost, is being passed on or is available to our SMEs at rates of 4%, 5%, 5.5%. Why do the pillar banks or why do the state agencies have to take that kind of a margin? Why along the way is that cost being imposed on SMEs? We should be able to get that money which we're getting at zero or near to zero cost. We should be allowed to pass that on to the SMEs in grant form, in liquidity form or in loan form at a zero cost. And I think that has to be a major focus. The state needs to either reform the SCBI and the other vehicles that we're using to get it through and avoid using the pillar banks who are basically price gouging. So what I'm trying to say to you, Minister, is this, that we need to have a state business interruption response. We're hearing calls for zero VAT rate, for rates breaks, for a various suite of measures from the various representative organisations of small business, the hoteliers, the retail and the hospitality industries. So in the absence of the insurance industry, as we know, FBD in particular, who need to be called out for their shameful reneging to date on valid business interruption policies. I have seen correspondence from some policyholders specifically telling them that they are covered for the coronavirus. I'm sure other deputies have also. It is outrageous in the extreme the way that FBD have treated these policyholders and these businesses who have paid their premiums, and they're now likely to have to resort to legal avenues to pursue the insurance companies, who should be stepping up to the plate. And I think the government should be stepping up to the plate there and ensuring that business interruption flows to business. Minister, by way of a couple of questions I want to put to you. Are you aware of the SME recovery plan, which has been drafted by the various representative organisations in conjunction with the former Department of Finance Secretary General John Moran? It has a suite of, it has 4 headings: crisis management, financing, taxation and cost flexing, in terms of a suite of measures to help business get through the period and to help business kick-start to reopen. Will you engage with them in relation to what's in this plan, and I mean real and meaningful engagement? Can you pursue the option of getting finance, grants and liquidity to business at 0% cost? If we're getting it at 0% cost, can we not pass it on? Will you look at giving business grants and not load them with more debt? And finally, will you please pursue the many policyholders who have been reneged on shamefully, as I said previously, by FBD and by some other insurances, but mainly FBD. Thank you.
Naming individual companies. The time has expired for that particular question, Minister, or for those questions, Minister. You might agree to provide written responses to the members in relation to that. Time has expired for that. And moving on to the Sinn Féin members, you have 15 minutes. Are you dividing your time? Yeah, Deputy Imelda Munster.
Thanks. We find ourselves in a time of unprecedented crisis, and people have been on lockdown for weeks. Most businesses have closed their doors and continue to endure enormous financial losses. They don't know when they can get back to normal, or even if they'll survive. Hundreds of thousands of people are out of work, and there are so many uncertainties. But despite those uncertainties, there are a few things that are very clear. This crisis isn't going away anytime soon, and SMEs are going to be the major losers if we don't act immediately to save them. The response from the Department of Business to this reality has been poor. It's shocking that, other than the few initial announcements made at the start in the first couple of weeks of this crisis, no real solutions have been offered to SMEs almost 2 months in. The 3 main schemes that were announced are not fit for purpose. The Credit Guarantee Scheme and the Microfinance Ireland Loan Scheme have interest rates that are too high for most SMEs to even consider, Minister. The Credit Guarantee Scheme allows for lending using criteria and interest rates set by the banks before this crisis hit. Microfinance Ireland loans are charging between 4.5% and 5.5% interest rates. The future growth lines are designed for planning for 8 to 10 years into the future. None of these options reflect the reality facing thousands upon thousands of SMEs in the state at present. And if you need proof of that, you don't need to look further than the Department's website, which is tracking the take-up of COVID-19 schemes. According to the uptake tracker, as of the 23rd of April, only 209 loans had been approved in total. The uptake for the Credit Guarantee Scheme is unclear because the figures provided for approvals give figures going back to 2012, bizarrely. And I wonder, Minister, do you have the figures of approval since the scheme was repackaged or re-announced in terms of COVID, or have you made inquiries as to what those figures would be? The Sustaining Enterprise Fund has had 1 application, according to the tracker. The SBCI COVID-19 Working Capital Scheme has had 56 approvals. Microfinance Ireland loans have had just 153 approvals. Now, obviously, the number of applications are higher than the number of approvals, but not by a very high margin. Just over 2,000 overall have availed. They're remarkable figures, Minister, at a time when tens of thousands of businesses are in major difficulty. Businesses are accumulating debt now, businesses have no cash flow now, and they'll fail unless something radical is done right now. The uptake of the figures, Minister, should tell you all you need to know and should be a wake-up call. Other countries have managed to introduce interest-free lending options for small businesses within a week, and the process was streamlined to ensure that the businesses could have the money in their accounts within days of making their application. That's what we need to do. 80% of small business cannot make their quarterly rents this period. That should send another alarming message to you, Minister. So my questions are straightforward. Businesses need access to interest-free loans and grants, relief on overheads and bills, and a debt write-down to those who have accumulated debt. So what plans have you, Minister, to ensure that interest-free loans or loans with very low interest are available to SMEs for the rest of this crisis and thereafter? What plans has the Minister to introduce a grant system for businesses who need access to cash now? A reopening grant, Minister, costs needed for reopening. Have you considered that that should be grant-aided? Have you plans to issue grants for that? And will you, Minister, introduce a moratorium on overheads, on rates, on rent, insurance to minimise the accumulation of debt for SMEs during this crisis? And what plans do you have, Minister, to allow for a debt write-down to ensure that businesses will not fail during this crisis? I don't want any more spin, don't want any more waffle, don't want any more half-baked solution. Clearly, given the uptake of the figures for the uptake, shows that the proposals and the solutions you put forward are not acceptable to businesses in this current climate. They're not what they need. And I have people, I mean, we've all spoken to people. People with small businesses are just sick with worry over this, Minister. And we've all had people, I have business people contact me daily, whether they be gym owners, whether they're hairdressing saloon, transport companies, hospitality businesses. They're all terrified that their business are going to fail, and they're terrified that their staff will lose their jobs, and they need help now. The consequences of not providing the solutions that I've outlined, Minister, are enormous for small businesses, and we have to avoid mass closures of businesses, or the economy will not recover, and certainly not recover for the foreseeable future. We can't allow hundreds of thousands of people to remain unemployed. The knock-on effects on the economy and on people's lives will be dire. Minister, you had said at the start that the right supports, you want to implement the right supports at the right time. This is now the time.
Thank you very much, Minister. Just briefly before I start, we do really live in strange times. It's February since I was elected, so it's the first opportunity I've had to speak in the new Dáil. So I want to thank those people who trusted me with their vote in the election, people in Limerick City and people in the parts of Tipperary I represent. So I want to thank them very, very much, and I will do my best to represent them as best I can. As I said, we do live in really strange and difficult times, and I want to thank all the people at home who have observed the advice we've given them and done their best to flatten the curve and do their best to make sure that people are safe and lives are saved. I'm constantly, as you will be well aware, fighting for better conditions and working facilities for the staff in University Hospital Limerick in particular. And I know the incredible work they do there, whether they're doctors, nurses, porters, support staff, is vital during these hard times. So I want to really particularly thank all those people. In addition, I also want to thank those who work in our supply companies, food shops, transport, delivery, pharmacies and others keeping the show on the road. Thank you very much to them as well. Their work often goes unnoticed and undervalued, but it's essential work and should be treated by the government going forward. As party spokesperson and Workers' Rights Minister, I want to raise 3 key issues with you, and as time is very limited, I'll keep it short so you'll have time to answer. My first question, Minister, is can you outline what plans you are preparing to ensure workers will be safe when they're returning to work? For instance, will businesses be legally obliged to provide, for instance, hand sanitisers, Perspex glass and other protective equipment? What legal protections will workers have if employers do not provide these? My second question, Minister, is about protections for those who are working from home. and you'll be aware that it's estimated that approximately 90% of employees are now working from home, and that's according to a survey by irishjobs.ie. And 44% of those surveyed said they are now working longer hours. Many have an additional work load, and others said they're finding it hard to turn off. So we need legislation to govern this area, Minister, as just not during this crisis. This is going to be a change of way. An awful lot of people work. People will find themselves working from home in the future. You know, this is not just a crisis we're going through at the moment. The country has changed, probably the world has changed, and we need to legislate to make sure that we're protecting those workers, to make sure that there's, for instance, that the right to disconnect law. And can the Minister update me on what the government's position will be on that to protect those workers who will end up working from home? And finally, Minister, my third question is, can you update the House on their plans to introduce a living wage as set out in your joint document with Fianna Fáil? You will be aware, Minister, that I raised this issue on the living wage with you for a number of years, and with your predecessors who sat in that chair. The 32nd Dáil, as you will be well aware, passed a motion supporting the living wage in October, and I'm delighted to see you've seen the light and followed Sinn Féin's lead on this. So we have published our own plan on how we would do it while protecting financially vulnerable businesses. So can the Minister put some meat on the bones of their plan to introduce a living wage, which we've read about a lot in the media, or is it just an aspiration on paper that the government have no intention of reaching? So, Minister, that's three questions there. You might answer them now, or if not, if you don't, you might send me a written response.
Minister.
Gormaigot, and I just want to say thank you to the deputies for raising these various matters. There's a lot of things have been spoken about here, so I'll try and get through them as quickly as I can. Just in terms of worker protection, the HSA have a key role there with the HSE, and we are also we're preparing a document, and we will be publishing that shortly. So it'll include specific guidance around around how to implement physical distancing in the workplace. It's around respiratory hygiene and hand hygiene. So we're working very closely with the HSE, and the HSA are working with them to make sure that we have those guidelines, because I know that it's important for employees, and I know that it's important for employers as well to know that they have the right conditions in place for people who are either continuing to work, or those that are hoping to return to work. We're also engaging with the unions and employers to ensure that that we have their input, and we have a safe and protective workplace. In relation to there was a number of issues raised there. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, you went. Okay.
Clark was signalling I didn't have her name there. Deputy Clark. Apologies.
Thank you. Before I begin, as this is my first speech in this chamber, I would like to thank the people of Longford and Westmeath for putting their faith in me to represent them in this chamber. It really is a great privilege. Never, when I walked through the doors over there for the first time, did I imagine my maiden speech would be in the middle of a pandemic. Yet here we are. The Minister, we are all aware we're now living in very uncertain and worrying times. Judging by the Stability Impact Report that you delivered last week, none more so than our small businesses, who are now faced with a future that is very bleak indeed. With gross domestic product set to fall by 10.5%, modified domestic demand by 15%, and an unemployment rate of 22%. Your document states that a difficult journey ahead, but Ireland faces it from a position of strength. Minister, your statement of a position of strength is not one that's shared or agreed with by many small businesses in my constituency. In fact, it's vastly at odds with their position. Thousands of families are now out of work, and granted, most of those families have availed of the relevant supports that have been put in place. But those who run a small business employing up to 10 people are extremely anxious at the fact that the lack of supports for them will force them to keep their doors closed when the economy starts moving again. Business owners across Longford and Westmeath have contacted me stating that they ran out of personal savings and disposable cash to cover rent, rates, insurance and other fixed overheads, including a loss of stock that would make it viable for them to reopen whenever that may be. These small and medium businesses have always been the backbone of towns and villages, local communities, the length and breadth of my constituency, and they're a vital part to the fabric of everyday life. The impact of COVID-19 on the SMEs for the coming months and years is, in all honesty, yet known, but we have an opportunity to face it from a position that supports smaller businesses who have proved themselves in the past and put their shoulder to the wheel. They are willing and able to do it again, but that will be very much dependent on a comprehensive government response that includes viable and sustainable supports that are sufficient in scale and easy to access to assist them to recommence trading. These issues are particularly prevalent within the retail, hospitality, salons, childcare, tourism and manufacturing sectors. These businesses cannot be chastised by banks that we own, banks that we bailed out in the past, with unfeasible interest rates that makes it impossible for them to gain access to working capital when needed. And make no mistake, it's needed now more than ever. As my colleague Deputy Doherty outlined to you last week, Minister, far more payments are made through the pandemic unemployment payment than through the temporary wage subsidy scheme. And I want to reiterate the point that this needs to be addressed to prevent the relationship between employer and employee being permanently severed. Businesses in my constituency have made it very clear to me, Minister, that the Small and Medium Enterprise Credit Guarantee Scheme and the COVID-19 Working Capital Scheme need to be immediately reformed in a manner that will allow them to reopen their doors, continue to provide employment and provide services into the communities where they are ingrained. As AIB held their AGM yesterday, Minister, I must ask, what issues did you raise? And did any of the issues you raised concern access and liquidity credit for small business owners who are not in a position to take on additional debt and feed into a banking system that seeks to profiteer from a time of crisis? Minister, this government has been big on announcements but short on delivery. What has been announced is not matching what is being delivered on the ground. Mistakes are being made and they must be rectified. Many business owners have put their life and soul into creating and maintaining employment through the last economic crash. And if they close, it will sound the death knell on many already vulnerable towns and villages as people are forced to seek employment elsewhere. This crisis is an unprecedented event. We've never faced anything like it before, nor have we recovered from anything like it before. But one thing is certain, without supports that are sufficient, easy to access, this pause in trading will become a loss of business and permanent job losses. We must support our SME sectors as much as we can, with zero interest applied loans and, where necessary, 100% state guarantees.
Thanks, Deputy. Congratulations on your maiden contribution, Deputy Clerk. Moving on to the Fine Gael deputies now. We have three, I think, beginning with Deputy Kieran O'Donnell. You have 10 minutes in total.
10 minutes, 3 minutes, yeah. Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. Minister, Four. So we have four, right, just about 2 minutes. I'll try and very quick question and response from the Minister, if I could, please. Minister, I think it's generally acknowledged by, I want to speak in terms of the small business sector in Limerick and North Tipperary, which I represent, that the Government have very much put in place measures to ensure they can come through the COVID. But I think the biggest challenge now we face is in terms of getting businesses reopened. And we must ensure, and this is a challenge will be to ensure that the liquidity crisis doesn't become a solvency crisis for the small business. That's the big challenge. It was the big challenge in the last crisis. It's the biggest challenge now. So what I'd ask you, Minister, is have you looked at doing sectoral plans? I think that's the key. Proper preparation, looking at how various industries are impacted, the impact of social distancing, and above all, that they can be viable. What businesses want to see is a sightline. They're not looking actually to see things to be opened up overnight, but they want to see over the next number of months when they get to a point, and that we want measures in place to ensure that the liquidity crisis does not become a insolvency crisis for the SME sector. So, Minister, you might just respond. Thank you.
That issue. Can I just be very clear here? First of all, the Taoiseach announced earlier that a comprehensive plan is being developed with regard to how restrictions will be eased and what they will look like. Unfortunately, it's not going to be like flicking on a switch and everything goes back to normal. That's not going to happen. But we will have the roadmap. We will have the supports and we are engaging with businesses on protocols. We're working with the LEAF, which is the Labour and Employers Economic Forum. We're working with the HSA, we're working with IBEC, we're working with ICTU. I've met every single representative body. I've had conference calls with them all. I have listened to all of their concerns, and I'm listening to all of the concerns that I'm hearing today from the different deputies that are bringing them in from obviously all parts of the country. And I'm putting together a package of supports with Minister Donoghue. But what we have to do is target the right place at the right time, because we must remember that this is taxpayers' money. It's not finite, but we want to get the best value for the investment that we want to put in. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. Look, from our conversations previously, you know the stories I've relayed to you from the businesses in Kildare and Laois, as well as my dealings with ISME, Chambers Ireland, Kildare Chamber and others, as to the challenges that business is facing right now. And as we move to the reboot phase, as you've talked about, Minister, about getting business back up and running, that roadmap for business is going to be really, really critical. But there's 3 questions I just want to put to you today, as well, on top of the fact of the next stage of supports that we'll need for business. What can business do now, businesses that are closed and need to reopen and want to prepare, who are contacting each of us as members of this House, to see what can they do in this time to prepare? And I particularly think of the likes of the retail sector that has had to, and thankfully has been, stayed open, and due regard to all of those staff who have done that vital service for our country. What lessons can be learned from business that's closed now, and what can they do now as they're closed to try and make sure that they're best prepared for being able to open with social distancing and all the measures that are there? Small businesses are having to change and adapt. Online sales have skyrocketed under COVID. What supports are available for small businesses in relation to online, and in relation to existing loans of up to 50,000 from Microfinance Ireland? What level of interest has there been in the applications for these loans in recent times?
Oh, thank you. Deputy, thanks for that. First of all, there's a lot of things that businesses can do now while they remain closed, and they can prepare to get ready to go back to work. Any businesses that's on the wage subsidy scheme can bring in some of their staff, and they can start to talk to them and look at how they can plan to go back to work. If you look at the NSAI guidelines, that's the Retail Protection and Improvement Guideline, that's available online. I'd recommend that businesses get a look at that particular document. There's also another document that gives guidelines for manufacturing, how they can best comply with the new norm, because we're in a new world now where we have to have social distancing, and there's a number of other issues that we need to look at. So I would say to businesses, talk to your LEOs, get the 2,500 business continuity support, and have a look and bring in, that gives you a voucher where you can bring in experts in that area and look at what your financial planning is. Do you need to make an application to your bank? They'll give you the advice that you want. I'd also say to them, trading online. I gave you the example earlier of one company that has increased their turnover by 200% because they went online. So there's a trading online voucher, 2,500 from the local enterprise office. When you spend that one, you can go back and get another one. So that's €5,000 available, and there's a lot more online transactions now. Thanks, in terms of retail, etc.
Minister Helen McEntee.
Thank you, Minister, or Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Minister, for the work that you, your team and your department are doing. And I think a huge amount of support has been provided to the business community, but also to employees to this date. I think what people want to know next is how can their business get going again, how can they start, and obviously we know that it's not going to be flicking on a switch, that it will be gradual, but also that people won't be operating, say, at full capacity when they do start. So we need to take a number of issues into consideration. I know some of these areas don't come under your remit, but obviously in terms of looking at the viability of a business, we need to be looking at rates, we need to be looking at charges and flexibility, we need to be looking at continued support and flexibility from our banks, we need to look at the issue of VAT, in particular for our hospitality and our tourism sector, issues of commercial rents, but also continue to try and transform and address the issue of insurance. I've had a number of proposals, many of which have been raised already by a number of deputies, but in trying to provide that support as well to business directly from your own department, that it could be in the form of some kind of a restart grant, a working capital loan, re-employment incentives, again perhaps linking that with our employment scheme currently working, but also supports for seasonal workers. So my question question is, can you assure me that in putting forward a roadmap and making sure that we are providing as much financial and other support to businesses, that you take all of these into consideration? And finally, if I could just ask as well, while you mightn't be able to give in detail, but just to confirm that your department is still working on the potential consequences of Brexit, because while we hope that there will be an agreement to extend the transition period, that's obviously not happened yet. And while the crisis is COVID, Brexit is still on the horizon.
Minister to respond.
Thank you, and thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Minister. Just to say that, just the last question first. All of the preparation that we did for Brexit, I have to say, has been extremely useful in how we have responded to this COVID pandemic. There were a lot of structures in place, a lot of funds, a lot of different supports that we had there. We've been able to expand on them, we've been able to improve them, and we certainly haven't forgot about Brexit, although I will be honest, all of our focus currently is on supporting businesses and in helping them to deal with the impact of this pandemic. And I think it's clear what we have to do. First of all, we had, and Deputy Hayden said this, first of all, we had the initial shock. Now we're in the sustainment or the phase, and the third phase of it all is the reboot phase, and that's when we need to put additional support. So we've already given the wage subsidy scheme and the enhanced PUP payment. That has cost over €4 billion, and it was the right thing to do. And I know a lot of companies have taken on board the wage subsidy scheme, and they have been able to use it very effectively. It's proved very popular. The one thing that people asked for and businesses asked for was cash flow. Their first port of call are the banks. I spoke with the head of the 3 major banks yesterday, and all of them had said that the 2/3 of their requests were for to take up payment breaks. So they have 3 months moratorium on their loans, and I understand that's been extended for 6 months. So 2/3 of all the requests, and the banks have said that they are working with them. So you go to your bank first, and the next port of call then is the different supports that are available there. And the local enterprise office and Enterprise Ireland and IDA for their clients are available to work with businesses and help them through this difficult period.
Thanks, Minister. Minister of State, Damien English.
First of all, Minister, just to say I want to thank you on behalf of the many businesses and employees out there for your swift action when you did row in with a number of supports, yourself and the Department of Finance as well, supporting businesses to be able to keep open, to keep their staff employed, keep that link, which is very, very important to a lot of employees as well. So there's a lot of swift action taken there to support that, and also to support through the wage subsidy and the other payments as well, a lot of employees who are out of work at this moment in time but hope to get back to work as well. So to recognise that, swift action, and as you said yourself, that's kind of phase 1, phase 2. There will need to be more support. There will need to be, as you develop the next stage of the response as well. So I would urge you in doing that as well to bear in mind a lot of the other sectors and companies and SMEs which mightn't always fall into the category for your department, which is in your IDA clients, your EI clients, your LEO clients. There's many other SMEs which are the lifeblood of our local economies. They could be our shops, they could be our play centres, our restaurants and so on, who don't usually get your support. To keep that in mind, and keep in mind they need support again to maybe reopen with cash support. Some of them will need support to be able to stay closed as well during the next couple of weeks while they're waiting for their turn as restrictions are lifted as well. So we do welcome your plans to announce more supports, your plans to have step-by-step plan for restrictions to be removed. And also, if you could bear in mind, I know you got a response from Linda Murray from the Pally as well. Their body represent the leisure sector, the play centres, the bowling alleys, the pet farms, the activity centres. Right. If you could bear in mind that sector needs a lot of help too. I know you have the correspondence, and thanks for the help so far.
Deputy. Moving on to Deputy Stephen Matthews, the Green Party. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, you may have had the opportunity to read the recent NESC report on employment vulnerability as part of a just transition. It reports on the challenges of moving to a low-carbon economy and eventually to zero carbon, but also on the opportunities for innovation, for employment, retraining and investment. Just transition is described in that document as a bridge from where we are now to a future where all jobs are green and decent, where poverty is eradicated and our communities are thriving and resilient. It is a systemic and whole-of-economy approach to sustainability. It is a driver of job creation. It embeds social justice and climate justice into economic policy. We have an obligation to address our global climate chaos. Adhering to the principles of a just transition is how we bring everyone along on that challenge of long-term carbon emission reductions and ensures that the impacts of climate policy are fair on the individual. The next decade will be a green decade, and we are at a moment of complete change. The Green New Deal, the EU financial supports will be transformative in creating a future economy that works for all of us. It is up to us to grasp that opportunity. Minister, in this context, would you consider creating an Office of Just Transition within your department? I have 3 more questions I'll put to you first, Minister. Minister, there's been much speculation, we've heard it discussed here today, about the easing of health restrictions and what businesses may be permitted to open on a phased basis, and obviously in line with best medical advice, health advice. A significant challenge to business owners across all the sectors that have been mentioned here today, the retail sector and professional services, hospitality, tourist industry and others, will be the requirement to manage that workplace in line with social distancing, limiting numbers of staff or customers in attendance and strict adherence to that guidance. And along with the valid concerns that other deputies have raised here this afternoon about requests for support around cash flow and liquidity and rates and rents and insurance and the other pressures, there is also a need for clear guidance on what social distance structural changes will be required in order to trade again. And I'm talking about alterations to the shop floor, to offices, to customer and staff areas, and in general the normal work practices that have to be changed. These all have to be addressed. I've raised previously with the Minister for Finance about increasing the application of the amount and the application of the business continuity voucher system to cover this. And in response, it was indicated that other measures were being considered. So, Minister, I want you to, if you can, outline your department's progress on these other measures and support measures available to business to actually implement the structural alterations to the workplace and the guidance there on what those alterations may look like, changes in work practice and health requirements that might be required. And, Minister, you did cover a lot of the supports in your opening statement. And I'm talking about the practical measures that might be taken today while the doors to those businesses are closed. They could be carrying out those practical measures. And the 2 NSAI documents that you referred to, I have read both of them, and while they do cover a lot of the areas of concern, I don't think they fully cover the concerns I have on about the practical structural changes that could be made right now while the doors to those businesses are actually closed. Minister, in relation to the wage subsidy scheme, you are aware that women returning from maternity leave are experiencing difficulty and being denied acceptance onto the temporary wage subsidy scheme. In order to qualify, an employee must have been on the payroll through January and February. However, in the case of maternity leave, this may not be the case. Trade unions have raised this problem and I have been contacted by those affected. Minister, can you clarify, is this an anomaly in the wage subsidy scheme and one which will be addressed and rectified quickly in order to grant women returning to work after maternity leave the same rights and supports as other workers? Minister, in relation to commercial rents, can you provide clarity on the position of commercial renters during this crisis and if they are included in the eviction moratorium as set out in the emergency measures in the Public Interest Act? And can the Minister provide clear information to commercial tenants and landlords on how these tenancy protections are to be implemented? Finally, Minister, I would ask that you would liaise with the Minister for Transport to confirm when the Waterford to Limerick Junction rail line will be reopened. I believe it's been closed in relation to Irish Rails and in relation to COVID. This rail line provides a vital south-east-west link for passengers and needs to be restored as soon as possible. And furthermore, and in relation to Brexit and exports, the Limerick Junction to Rosslare Port and the Dublin to Rosslare line should be assessed for an investment to provide an improved commuter service and also to maintain that business and trade transport link directly to the rest of Europe. Thank you, Minister. Cathaoirleach.
Thank you, Deputy Matthews, for raising those issues. Just in terms of the NESC report on vulnerable employment, I just want to welcome the publication of that report, and my department is already engaged in a number of activities outlined by the report as being key drivers of the response to just transition. The department has been very engaged and we're very committed to that. The regional enterprise plans are all focused on climate change and there's specific initiatives for the Midlands where Bord na Móna announced job losses there, so I think there's a just transition facilitator was set up through Minister Bruton's department. There's support for firms on energy efficiency through the local enterprise office, through Enterprise Ireland, and we have a dedicated team in my department working with the team of the Minister for Climate Action, Minister Bruton. Also in our Future Jobs initiative, there's a specific pillar there that says how we transition to a low-carbon economy. So there's a lot of work going on in that particular space. The other question you asked was about supports for businesses that need to change their the outline of their manufacturing plant to comply with new guidelines. Just to say that Enterprise Ireland are available to advise on structural changes. There's also the business continuity voucher through the local enterprise offices, so I'd suggest that for those that need to change, that they can take that into account, because that's another issue that they're going to have to address in terms of opening up their businesses. Maybe they need to put up perspex screens, maybe there's a number of things they need to do there. So use that business continuity grant that's applicable. Anybody can apply for it in the local enterprise office, get that and they can plan with that, they can plan how best they can do that, and we'll certainly look at seeing how we can help them down the road with these obvious changes that they'll have to do. Relating to the maternity leave and the access to the wage subsidy scheme, just to say that the operation of that scheme is a matter for my colleague Minister Donoghue, but I will raise this matter with him. But I understand that women who are due to finish statutory maternity leave, either paid or unpaid, but cannot return to their employment due to COVID-19, they're entitled to the pandemic unemployment payment from when they were due to return to work. But I do think that they should engage with their employer to see maybe they can, I don't know, maybe they can look at the wage subsidy scheme. Again, I will raise this matter with Minister Donoghue. Relating to you said about this the rail line between Limerick Junction and Waterford, yes, I'll raise that matter with Minister Ross. And the other issue is the issue of commercial rents and tenants, and I do know that that commercial rents is a real concern for many businesses. A recent survey from Retail Excellence estimated that only 18% of retail businesses paid their rent due at the start of April for Q2, but despite that, we're not hearing of widespread reports of businesses being threatened with eviction. So that tells me that the vast majority of landlords are taking a practical and common sense approach to this, and I encourage them to do that because landlords obviously are businesses too, and they should recognise that this is a unique situation. So if you have a good, reliable tenant, you're not going to want to lose them, because maybe not everybody's going to need rented property when unfortunately or when fortunately we get to the other side of this, but unfortunately there are obviously going to be businesses who may not be able to return, and that's the reality of it. So I think that landlords who have good tenants should really be looking after them. We also believe that if landlords got flexibilities from the banks, we'd ask them to pass that on to their businesses. But of course, in saying all this, I know that there will always be exceptions, and we are examining what can be done in those cases. And I've raised the matter around protections for businesses with the Attorney-General. I've asked him to look at what has been done in other countries and to see if it's possible to put similar protections in place here.
Thanks, Minister. Deputy Brendan Howlin.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you for the opportunity, Minister, to address in these surreal times the House. I must say that in my long sojourn here, I never envisaged the day I'd be coming in to see seats in Dáil and roped off from members, but that's the reality we face now. Clearly, from everything we know, Minister, businesses in Ireland have never faced the sort of pressures unique that they are facing and that exist right now. And government supports are vital, remain vital and will be vital if we are to achieve our collective responsibility. Our collective role is to keep businesses and jobs afloat. So I want to use the few minutes I have to make a number of points, and these are points that have been made directly to me by businesses. I could have any number of them. I want to raise 9 particular issues. Let me start with issue number 1, which is actually the point raised by Deputy Matthews, and that is security of tenure and lease security. And I must say that we acted very, I think, decisively and clearly and rightly to protect private tenants from eviction in this time. I'm afraid we have to act with the same degree of certainty, and getting advices is not what is required. People are worried, and you rightly say that the bulk of landlords are decent, but some are not. And some leases are being terminated, and I think we need to legislate in that regard, and I'd like to hear your view on that. In terms of business rates, and there's been talks about leeway and forbearance on business rates. Let us be quite clear. We should have a clear, understandable pattern right across the country in every local authority that there will be a forbearance. In the same way as, for example, businesses are affected by 25% to access your wage subsidy schemes, they should have forbearance on rates. But that cannot be carried by local authorities. 30% plus of the revenue of local authorities is rates. So it has to be a national scheme supported by central government. The third point I want to raise is in relation to a point raised very forcibly to me by RMT, the maritime union, the union that represents seafarers. And they've raised real concerns with me that shipping companies are utilising this crisis to force sometimes compulsory redundancy or alteration of work patterns that have been hard fought and won over decades. The pay and conditions of both deck workers and port workers have to be protected, and I would like you to just take particular interest in this, and obviously it will be primarily an issue too for your colleague, the Minister for Transport. The fourth issue I want to raise is in relation to businesses and companies getting state support. It is vital, as I say, that they get that support, but it must be a condition of ongoing state support that such businesses engage with the industrial relations machinery of the state. This unparalleled crisis cannot, as I say, be simply utilised by some, a minority of companies and businesses, as a cover to undermine workers' pay and conditions. And that has to be implicit in the rules and regulations for any drawdown of supports. And in relation to the actual supports available, and many of the colleagues in their address already have talked about them. I mean, I won't recite again, because they've been effectively recited by previous speakers, the actual degree of takedown, of call down of some of the supports that you have listed to all of us when we posed questions about what is available, particularly to SMEs. The actual call down has been pitifully small, because when cash flow is short, when liquidity is difficult, you don't want to add significantly to your debt. And if the state, as others have said, can borrow, and the NTMA have now said they can borrow, the most recent borrowing is at 0.25%. So 1/4% they can borrow at. How could it be that they're lending on at 4 or 5%? And you wrote to me when I contacted you in relation to various companies that require supports, that the first thing you should do is go to your bank. And you said it again today. Well, I had a conversation with the director of banking of one of the largest bank, the second largest bank in the country, and the head of SME lending. And it really is, if you talk to the banks, a business as usual approach. They'll determine who might be viable in this crisis, who might be viable. And if they give you an overdraft, the overdraft is at 8% plus interest rates. So that is no help at all to people and companies who are stuck in this situation. So we really have to be thinking in terms of the extent of the crisis, requiring not a business as usual approach, but rather an approach that says that money must be available in the same way as when the banks were faced with a crisis in 2008 and 2009, they didn't say it's a business as usual approach. They marched themselves hot foot down to Merrion Street and made it crystal clear that they wanted a complete and total bailout. And what happened? What happened? The debts of the banks were socialised and put on the backs of the people. But it is time now that that realisation was enforced on the banks, that they need to pay back that debt owed in real terms to the SME sector now. And it can't be, let's determine whether you're viable in the middle of an unprecedented storm. And if you are determined by us to be viable, we will lend you money at a punitive rate. Oh, and by the way, if we give you a 3-month, now a 6-month moratorium on your repayments, we're going to add that up at the end, and all the time the interest rate is clocking. So our great forbearance is actually going to make us more money. Now that is just not the approach that's acceptable or required of the banking sector, and I ask, Minister, that you would pass that on as Minister for Business to your Cabinet colleagues. A critical issue raised to me, and I want to underscore this because I had a difficult conversation today with a very significant businessman in my own constituency, is the issue of insurance. And from a different perspective, it is the issue of liability, the duty of care. It is now going to be impossible for companies and businesses to get COVID-19 insurance. Any renewal will not include that. And for businesses to open without that insurance will be impossible. That's what they're telling me directly, because they couldn't take the risk of being liable for either their employees or their customers becoming victim of COVID-19 if they weren't insured against it. And we just have to have a solution to that. Some sort of indemnity or insurability. No more than you can't sue if you get the flu when you visit your local supermarket. So we need to address that issue, or we won't have businesses reopening when this phase passes. And I would ask you, as a matter of urgency, to look at this issue of liability in insurance in relation to it. A couple of quick other points I want to raise. My colleague Jed Nash has already raised the importance of monitoring post-COVID, when businesses start slowly to come about. And you said again today, well, this is a matter for the HSA. But does the HFA, because we're all getting individual calls from workers who are petrified sometimes. And who do they reach out to? Who's going to say? Who's going to go into the workplaces? I spoke to one individual who was working in a call centre. Now, it's since closed, but in the early stages of this. And they were terrified to give out, terrified to complain, although they were working cheek by jowl. When we unravel this, who is going to monitor and insist and ensure? And have we the capacity and the scope to do that? Two other final brief points. The regional impact will not be uniform. In the South East, as all South East authorities are telling you, half of all jobs are already affected. Will you do a regional impact analysis so that we can actually have a regional differentiated response? And my final point is in relation to seasonal businesses. I'm trying to give you a litany, but there's 9 important issues. Seasonal businesses. I come from a tourist county as well. There are some very successful businesses that don't operate in January and February. And they're now excluded from the schemes that you have put in place. What am I going to say to those who would have normally looked forward to a very successful summer season but can't get the wage subsidy scheme support because they didn't operate in January or February?
Thank you, Deputy. Move on to Deputy Catherine Murphy. Democrats.
I welcome this debate, and I'm not sure that we shouldn't have a format that is the normal oral question format, because it is problematic not having the responses to other questions. I think at the very first instance, the health has to be the reference point, and the return to a safe working environment is, I think, what we all aspire to, where we won't see an escalation. So let me just state that in the first instance. For a number of weeks, the Social Democrats have been looking for an expert task force, and that needs to be sector by sector, and it needs to be, sequenced in terms of what are the industries that are returned. We may see some of that announced with the roadmap tomorrow or the day after. I think it's important to say that, we've all had contact from people in business, and they're saying very often, I can't take on another loan. I don't have any income. And it doesn't matter if the interest rate is 0% or 5% or 10%, if they haven't got an income to pay back. Obviously the interest rate really matters, but there is a real issue here. And if we start looking at the cost of creating jobs, we know the cost that from the IDA, from Enterprise Ireland, we know the tax forgone, we know, social welfare rates. There is a cost-benefit analysis in retaining jobs, and that's critically important. I am looking at some of the points that have been made in relation to timelines for reopening, and Chambers Ireland were talking about most businesses needing 2 weeks. So, Minister, that lead-in has to be taken into consideration in terms of giving people notice so that they can use the time well. And indeed, there is going to have to be an outlay for most businesses in terms of the COVID, the physical distancing measures and other measures depending on the industry. And for example, there should be some grant funding for that. I can foresee a situation where we're going to have a row in months to come about VAT even in terms of this. So I think that is something that's distinctive. The other point I want to make in relation to, I'm going to skip over a number of things and hopefully leave you a little bit of time to reply. The Health and Safety Authority, and I've certainly had people who have been on to me about something that's open that shouldn't be opened, and when you start looking at where the enforcement mechanism is, there isn't one. Essentially, ring the guards, what you're told, and that isn't satisfactory. Minister, will you specifically address what will change in terms of the Health and Safety Authority in terms of enforcement for non-compliant businesses, and there will be non-compliant businesses, what scaling up is there going to be, and does there require to be additional legislation in terms of enforcement? For example, there's going to be, we all know the construction sector, for example, is very varied. And it's varied in terms of compliance. For example, there's a large number of building workers that are located in Northern Ireland and routinely come up and down. That is going to be something that specifically has to be considered. Indeed, not exclusively from Northern Ireland. Some come from other parts of the UK and other parts of Europe. That has to be considered in the context of the return of the construction sector, because ports, airports, and indeed the movement of employees. I'm going to skip through quickly. I asked a question to you, and you responded to me in relation to the hairdressing sector. That includes a whole lot of other sectors: beauticians, nail bars, probably play centres, a whole lot of other areas. And you directed me towards the National Standards Authority of Ireland document. Very good document, but too general. And it is not specific to some areas, and there's going to have to be work with particular sectors because they're not all the same. Minister, can you address that? Retail Excellent Ireland, you gave, and I actually got a response from you in that. And in relation to, if you could address the issue in relation to the rent freeze on the commercial side, I mean, there is a real problem here, and about people being asked for it quarterly in advance. And under threat at the moment, I'm hearing from some people where they have not a direct relationship with the landlord, but they're renting from a building that is, pension fund or from a vulture fund or whatever, but a more anonymous landlord than a direct individual, if you like. So I'll leave the time for you to come back on those questions.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Murphy. I'll just start with the last question first. Regarding commercial rents and landlords, you know, I outlined what you know, where there a lot of them are you know, giving that latitude, and they're working with their tenants, and rightly so. But there are always going to be a cohort who don't do that. Now, I did speak to the Minister for Justice about this as well, and the difficulty here, and that's why I've asked the AG to look at it and look at how models in other countries and how it has worked, is that there could be constitutional issues around that, because commercial tenants and landlords, they're subject to a fairly, you know, it's commercial law and it's contract law you're going into there, so there could be issues around that, because a lot of them are quite complex, and that's why it's just taken a bit longer. But believe you me, there is a willingness to try and address the issue, but we have to do it in a way that obviously that it's going to work. So that's just to give you the update on that. Regarding on the exit plan or the exit strategy, we hope to be in a position, or expect to be in a position, to share that with the Irish public in the next couple of days. And the plan will set out different steps and a step, you know, as to, that we need to take as to how we can reopen the country and reopen our society based on different levels, on different intervals. We need to get the advice from the CMO on Friday as to when we should start the process of reopening the country and reopening the economy. And in doing so, we really have to look at things like the number of patients who are in the ICUs and COVID, of course. Those numbers just aren't good enough yet, as we know.
I accept that.
Yeah.
I just would like you to address some of the questions.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to do that.
The hairdressing and other areas like that, the very general.
Well, just to say that the HSA is available today for anybody that has concerns about their workplace. Contact the HSA, and they are available. The NSA guideline is available that you show, and the HSA and the HSE are working together, and.
Essentially, I'm asking a very specific question. Is it going to be scaled up? Because there'll be non-compliant industries here, and we need to know, is there going to be a means of enforcement?
Yeah, okay. Well, can I just say to you that that we are working, the HSA are working with the HSE. It's detailed, it's complex work. I hope to have that work completed and published shortly, and it will set out clearly what is expected of both employers and employees. And as I said, we have other protocols in place at the minute, and these guidelines set out a range of measures. And I hope to have the next set of guidelines, which, as I said, I hope to have them very shortly, and they'll be published. We're working with the unions, we're working with the employers to make sure that we get it right, because I absolutely understand, as I know you do, that people have to be sure that they're safe in their workplace, and the employers also want to make sure that they are putting in the right protections, because nobody wants to you know, cause difficulty for workers, so it's that they give them both that confidence, the right processes are in place, and employees have the confidence that they can go into work and feel safe. So that will happen.
Movement of construction workers across boundaries.
Well, again, as I said, the HSA and the HSE are working together. They're working with the different employers and with the unions to make sure that to have a suite and a document that everybody can work with, and that should be ready shortly.
Thank you, Minister. We move now to Solidarity People Before Profit. You have 10 minutes. Questions and answers, I take it?
Yeah, I'm sharing with Deputy Murphy. First of all, I want to say that we should acknowledge tomorrow is May Day, International Workers' Day, and to that end we have taken an initiative in our group to have this building, City Hall, and several other town halls across the country lit up in red in honour of our frontline workers and all workers. Never has it been more unequivocal, more obvious, the role that workers everywhere play in making the wheels turn round and making society happen. So we need to honour all workers, frontline workers and all workers tomorrow on May Day. I want to welcome too, Minister, the written confirmation from Simon Harris to Deputy Boyd Barrett that the Health Surveillance Protection Centre will investigate an alleged outbreak of COVID-19 in Liffey Meats in your constituency. I think that's urgent and it's welcome that it's going to happen. But I can't believe my ears when I listen to the answers to the question that I want to ask you that you've answered other deputies. You are 7 weeks into the crisis, you're working hard on a document, you're writing guidelines and you're working with the HSE to tell employers how to implement COVID-19 regulations. It's not good enough. There is no agency in the state that has power of enforcement, and that's what we're asking you here today. Will you extend the remit of the Health and Safety Authority that their inspectors can step onto a bus errand bus to make sure the driver is protected, walk into a building site, close it down if it's non-compliant, or into a non-essential workplace and close it down if it's non-compliant? Please answer that simple question. Extend the remit. My second question to you concerns the actual restrictions that have been placed, or any, on companies to liquidate during this period. And we are all aware of the question of debhnams. We've seen the protests yesterday, and I'm sure we'll see more of them. This morning, another company called Upright Ireland in City West attempted to move all its equipment and stock out of the centre to transport it off to Latvia. They want to close up and move off to Latvia. Many companies are using this opportunity of the crisis to do things they wouldn't normally get away with. And light touch regulation in times of normal business is dangerous, but in a pandemic it can be absolutely fatal, and it's very fatal to the workers who are about to lose their livelihoods. So will you impose restrictions on companies that they are not allowed to liquidate during the period of the crisis, whether that's extending the emergency powers or some statutory instrument?
Thank you, Deputy. Can I just say that in terms of companies that are not complying, the environmental health officers already have the power to close down companies who are not complying with the rules. So that is there already. Well, yes, the environmental yes, the HSE environmental health officers currently have the power. But what I am doing is, and I've said it clearly, that we will have the guidelines as a matter of urgency. There's a good deal of work has gone into them. No, okay. As I said to you, I will have them as a matter of urgency, and it's a comprehensive document. It's taken on board a lot of different issues that people and employers and employees are rightly concerned about, and we'll have that document as a matter of urgency. Your second question was in relation to the Debenham workers. Can I just say that, first of all, I'm sorry to hear what happened to Debenham workers, and it's obviously a very, very difficult time for them. As far as we're concerned, that Debenham should be engaging with their workers. They should be engaging with the unions, and the WRH or WRC, sorry, is available for the workers to give assistance.
Minister, I asked you to restrict companies from liquidating during the period of the crisis.
Well, that's something obviously that is being looked at in terms of the review. What's the name? Yeah, the examinership. That is being looked at in terms of that, and the Company Law Review Agency is looking at all of those issues, and they will be bringing forward recommendations to us. Think of the name.
Ask a question, ask a response, and then ask another question. Minister, the buck has to stop with you, and this government is scandalously disregarding the health and safety of workers. It's an utter disgrace that there is nowhere where workers can go and seek an on-site inspection. And there isn't... Oh, the HSE, the Minister says. I have an email from the HSE, which... Well, a minute ago you said the HSE. Minister, can I answer here? The HSE responded to me on the 23rd of April in response to an email by me about Keelings. This is further to your email of the 20th of April below. Please be advised that the HSE Environmental Health Service has no statutory role in the inspection of employee living accommodation or workplace health and safety. You and the Minister for Finance told me to go to the HSE 2 weeks ago in the Dáil and in a written answer. And the HSE now says clearly we have no role in terms of that. We've sent workers to the HSA repeatedly, and the HSA has said clearly and publicly they do not have the powers to enforce the public health guidelines. We've raised this repeatedly over the course of a month, and we've laid out the answer, which is for you to sign a ministerial order or statutory instrument to expand the powers of the HSA. Minister, can you answer a question clearly? How many on-site inspections of workplaces have taken place in relation to coronavirus guidelines? How many on-site inspections, either by the HSA or the HSE or the WRC? Workers have to be stopped being passed from Billy to Jack and need somewhere to go when they have a problem and they feel unsafe at work.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Just to say that the NSAI protocols are in place, that what should happen within the workplace. The HSA are available to go down to any company or to any employee that's concerned, phone them up, they will go on site, they will see the issue and they'll talk, because the best solution here is between employers and employees. Work together to get the right solution. That's the first thing. The second thing is, if there is a case where the rules are being blatantly ignored and they're not adhering to the guidelines, the environmental health officer in the HSE have the power to go in and take action. But can I just say that I'm working with, and I've said it before, the HSA is working with the HSE to develop a more detailed set of guidelines that will cover many eventualities that workers and employers need to have guidance on. So that is taking place, and as a matter of urgency, those will be published.
1 minute.
How many on-site inspections have taken place?
I don't have that figure to hand, but I will provide you with the information.
And the Minister might also comment, if it's the case that the HSE does have the role that the Minister says they have, well then why? And I got an email originally saying we're looking into it, etc., and then I got a considered response saying we don't have any role in this. Why is that confusion still persisting? And to bring this to reality, as opposed to an abstract point, take the example of Keelings. And in a letter I wrote to the Minister, I drew attention to an internal document which clearly makes very obvious that Keelings is operating on the basis of supposed family units of over 50 people in a situation where they say, and I quote, that you may at times be required to change family unit. So you're in a supposed family unit of over 50 other workers. Keeling says they can move you from one family unit to another family unit. It's an absolute disaster waiting to happen in terms of workers' health and safety. What are those workers meant to be doing? Do you not agree that an on-site inspection needs to happen there? I've written to the HSE, I've written to the HSA. How is an on-site inspection going to take place?
Minister.
Deputy, just to say, when you sent the letter in, there was a number of different issues involved in that letter. So just to be clear, HSA inspect, HSE, or the environmental health officers who are employed by the HSE, have the powers currently to close down a site if necessary, and that's the situation. Regarding the accommodation of workers, I'll have to come back to you on that, because I'm not, accommodation of workers, I'm not sure exactly who needs to inspect that. So I will come back to you on that. I don't have an answer.
Workplace health and safety. They didn't just say we don't have accommodation. They said the whole lot, the HSE. That's clear in their response.
In terms of the workplace, can I just be very clear? The HSA, that's the Health and Safety Authority, have the authority to go in to any workplace and inspect it. That's currently the situation. And there's been many cases. When this pandemic started, there was one particular company who was very concerned could they continue operating, and they were a food company. The HSA, NSAI went down to their premises, they worked with the employees, they worked with the employers, and they haven't had a day's bother since this started, and they're making bread every single day with no problems. So I would say to employers and employees, there are solutions, and the HSA will make themselves available to any company that wants them to go down and to be clear and to work with them and outline to them the steps they need to take. Some companies are doing the right thing. They may be worried they're not doing enough. Some employees are concerned, and I've heard them and I understand their concerns. Some employees are worried that their employers aren't taking the right actions. I've said to them, contact the HSA. They will go into any premises and they're happy to work with either employers and employees to make sure it's safe, because we all want it to be safe.
Thank you, Minister. That is very clear. Thank you. Now we move to the Regional Independent Group. Deputy Naughton.
Thank you. Corla. Minister, first of all, can I say that all steps need to be taken in reopening the economy, need to be conscious of the need to minimise the spread of COVID-19. And we all have to accept now that we're going to have to live with COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. Now, Minister, can I ask you, first of all, in terms of this guidance that has been worked on for the last 7 weeks by the Health and Safety Authority, the HSE, businesses need to know now. They need to know this weekend what they need to do to prepare to open up. Minister, the Health and Safety Authority, as you have rightly said, is advising and inspecting businesses on physical distancing. Can I ask you specifically, Minister, what advice was given to companies such as meat processing facilities? Because I'm told, and this Dáil has been told, that there is now a significant problem in a number of these meat plants across the country. And the third point that I have for you, Minister, is in terms of the measures that need to be taken regarding sterilisation and physical distancing within the workforce, staff training, health and safety, and PPE. Companies cannot and don't have the resources to fund that. They need financial assistance, and that has to come in the form of grant aid and not loans. And can you give a commitment in relation to that?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Just to say that there are the NSAI have guidelines on how companies should operate. And they're there and they're available, and companies should be adhering to them. There's no doubt about that. So, and as I said there previously, if there's issues and concerns, contact the HSA. We are developing a much more detailed set of guidelines to cover a lot more issues that are going to arise, and we will publish them as soon as we can. But the guidelines are there currently for the manufacturing process and processing plants that you're referring to. So the NSAI guidelines are there, and I would urge companies to get a copy of those and make sure that they're complying with them, because none of us want to see people going into plants where they're not protected and they're not safe, because that's only adding to the spread of this virus. So we don't want to see that happening. So they are there, and if the worries, go to the HSA and they'll go down and visit any of those. And the employees can call the HSA and explain to them they're not happy, and they can come down and see exactly what's happening. And as I said to you, it's in everybody's benefit that they work together and put the right protections in place.
Minister, as you know, we've had a problem with nursing homes. We don't want to see a problem in processing facilities across the country. You might come back to me on the issue of grant aid for getting businesses up and running in terms of the cost of training staff, the cost of equipping premises. Minister, can I turn to the wage subsidy scheme? I think the wage subsidy scheme must be prioritised as the primary support for workers and provide for a continuity between workers and their employees. Minister, I believe that the wage subsidy scheme, and you might clarify, will be continued beyond June and will be tapered off in line with a recovery in the economy to maintain that linkage where at all possible. And I'd ask you, Minister, to comment on actions by some companies, such as Bordnamona, that are being allowed to avail of the wage subsidy scheme and also then lay off staff and put them on welfare payments through the pandemic unemployment payment. Should it not be the case, Minister, that employers that are availing of the wage subsidy scheme should keep all of their staff on the books rather than lay off the majority of staff and keep a smaller proportion on the books? Can I ask you, Minister, will there be provision made for forgiveness in terms of debt during the lockdown for businesses? And will government increase the funding to local authorities in order for rates bill during the lockdown to be actually written off?
Okay, thank you, Can Corla. Just in relation to the wage subsidy scheme, as the Deputy will be aware, it's a very successful scheme with a lot more companies taking it up. And just to be clear, that companies who didn't take it up, it's still available for them to come and take it up now. You know, there's no barriers to the entry into it. You can have a mix, because some companies found themselves in the position where they could hold on to some staff and maybe lay others off. So it is permitted within the scheme that you can have a mix of the wage subsidy scheme, and for some, unfortunately, staff that have to let them go on to the unemployment benefit. So that mix is available. In terms of rates, currently we have the rates have been deferred, as you know, and that is welcome. And can I just say that I am working very closely with Minister Donoghue in preparing a suite of supports to reboot and assist companies get back to work. Because at the end of the day, what we all want is we want to see as many companies getting back fully operational, and as many as possible people returning back to work. So we are working on a suite of supports, and all of the suggestions that I have heard here today, we'll certainly take those on board as we are designing that package.
Minister, I believe that we need to continue a tapered wage subsidy scheme beyond June of this year, and deferring rates will not be sufficient. Rates need to be written off. Minister, a lot of work will need to be done in the provision of liquidity, particularly working capital for businesses. To deal with risk, there will need to be a state-backed bond scheme. Banks should also be instructed to apply forbearance and reset the covenant criteria to take into account the extraordinary circumstances that businesses are currently facing. And this covenant issue will become a far bigger issue during the year unless it's addressed now. Minister, government also needs to bring in direct reliefs in particular sectors. For instance, the restoration of the lower VAT rate scheme for the hospitality and tourism sector. And there needs to be continued forbearance, Minister, by revenue in terms of allowing businesses sufficient time to repay part VAT and part PRSI and PAYE bills from earlier this year. And can you give an assurance that that will be provided?
Thank you. Just to say, in terms of liquidity, we have the €450 million working capital facility, and that allows loans from 25,000 up to 3 million. It's at the reduced rate of 4%. I know some deputies think it should be even lower, but it's the normal price for overdraft facilities in the market is 8%, so it's a considerably reduced price. As part of that, also, you can avail of loans up to €500,000 that are unsecured, and I think that's important as well, where businesses don't have the security that they can go and apply for the COVID-19 working capital facility. The loans are for up to 3 years. In terms of the banks, I spoke with the head of the 3 main banks yesterday and the day before, and they have assured me that they have given forbearance. A lot of 2/3 of the requests that are coming in are actually for payment breaks, and the other 1/3 is for an increase in overdraft facilities. They tell me that they're working with their customers, and they have also extended this forbearance now from 3 months to 6 months, and I know that that will be of comfort to some people. They also tell me that that people are adverse to borrowing, and I understand that. I absolutely understand that, because people got scalded and they lost their shirt and everything else with huge debts before. And every lender has a duty of care to their customers as well. So I understand. Now you've mentioned a number of different issues there, Deputy, and we're working on a suite of supports. We're working very hard. I've consulted with all of the different representative groups. I've had conference calls with them all. I have spoken to all of the LEO representatives. I've spoken to 22 representatives from Chambers of Commerce right across the country. I've spoken to the Board of ISME. I've spoken to many, many different stakeholders. And the issues that you are raising are coming through. And as part of the suite of supports, we will examine all of those suggestions. And you can appreciate what we're trying to do is to get the best supports target at the right place at the right time, because we all want the same thing at the end of the day, is get these businesses back up and running.
Thank you, Minister. We move now to the Rural Independent Group. Deputy Healy Ray.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And first of all, Minister, I'd just like to address the following issues. With regard to loans and supports and grants, the one thing that I've been being told by whether it is our hoteliers, our publicans, our small business people is they don't want loans, quite simply because loans have to be paid back and they're already burdened with loans. If there is assistance going to be given out, it will have to be in the form of grants. In other words, money that they don't have to pay back, because quite simply they won't be able to pay them back. I want to also raise here today with you, Minister, the very serious situation with regard to the debhnams workers. We've had those workers who are working very diligently in a retail outlet in Tralee, and the one thing that they are saying to me very strongly, and I'm delighted that it is the case, that debhnams is going strong online and their sales are strong. But if their sales are strong, why are they leaving the important people, the people who worked for them, the people who served the customers every day and sold their brands and operated, for instance, in County Kerry, in the great town of Tralee, out of the Debhnams store? And I want to know, what is this government going to do to intervene on behalf of and in the support of the Debhnams workers who are protesting over the last, they were out yesterday. And I just want to hear you say what you will be able to do to support them. I want to come back again to our hoteliers, as you know, and I'm very glad that Kerry is, of course, the tourism capital, not of Ireland, but of the Western world. But having said that, the very success that we've had in tourism over the years has now resulted in the fact that we're most impacted than any other part of the country, because we have so many hoteliers, we have so many public houses, we have so many restaurants, and we have so many good people working in those businesses. I already raised with the Taoiseach the very important issue that these seasonal workers, because of the fact of when the virus came out and when the criteria was being set for the COVID payment of €350 per week, it resulted in that many of our seasonal workers who would have been going back during maybe March or into April, they actually hadn't started work on the 6th of March or subsequent to that. So those people are losing out on the €350 payment, and I'm very upset about that. I also wish to highlight, when we're talking about the recovery and getting back to work, I want to give you an example. There are 83 units under construction in Killarney town this minute for their Clewed houses on a 6-acre site. Now, what would be wrong with that site going back to work next week? Absolutely nothing. Social distancing, I'm not being smart about it, but there could be a man working down below on one side of it, and he'd have to walk a long journey to meet another man if the site was opened up again. It's perfectly reasonable and sensible and practical for these people to work. It's like talking about a man being up on a machine. If you want social isolation, get up on a digger and go way out working somewhere with it. Who's going to get near you? Yes, but can I just finish? I just have one other very important issue. With regard to coach companies, I want to give you an example, Minister, and please tune into this now because it's very important. There are many coach operators, I have some in Kerry, who have bought new coaches in the month of February and March. Now, those coaches haven't hit the road at all yet, and they're registered. Now, they're brand new, they've never done a mile on the road. Those are going to lose maybe 30,000 during this year in devaluation because of the registration plate that's on them. What they're asking for is, can they deregister those coaches? And in other words, take the registration that's registered to them away from them, which would mean instead of being a 2020 coach, that it would start off next January as a 2021 coach. It's a very practical thing. If the department could agree to it, it would save those companies an awful lot of money and would mean an awful lot to those businesses. So if I could just have specific answers on those specific questions, because they're really important. And Minister, it's nice to compliment people when they are doing work. I want to compliment you and the people in your department for the work that you're doing, but I'm asking you on my bended knees, please be practical about things like this. These are sensible things that you can do, that your department can do to help small businesses. And like I say, like the people that want to get working on the 83 units in Killarney, we've plenty of other jobs like that. And remember, we're talking about social and affordable housing, we're talking about putting people into homes, we're talking about getting men and women back out on the road again and back into work in a safe way. No one of us is saying that anything should go on that's not ensuring the safe distancing from other people. And the operators of these companies, these small business, these companies, and that would be operating lorries, go out on the road, they would do so in the best of way and in the safest of way.
Deputy Danny Healy-Rae. Now, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but unless there's time, the Minister won't be able to answer any of the questions at the end.
Sean Corley, I suppose what I have to say at the start is that we're very sorry. I suppose we're looking at that a lot of companies won't come back and we need to assist every employer that is going to attempt to carry on in any way we can, because every job is really valuable. And as I said in the questions to the Taoiseach, in relation to construction work and building companies, and even the construction of one-off houses, I'm asking to explore every avenue in relation to those type of situations, and every situation is different. And I'm sure that each person in the state now realises the importance of social distancing and will be doing everything they can to ensure that they follow the guidelines. But they need advice in relation to vans and work vehicles. They need help, Minister, in relation to the cost of insurance and rates and electricity bills. They need to get assistance with these. And my understanding in relation to rates was that if it didn't work, that we were entitled, if we were making no money, that we were entitled to, that we wouldn't have to pay the rates at all. And in relation to less income, a reduced rate demand. So we need to assist the local authorities in the amount of revenue that they're going to lose, because it's going to be massive. Clarity is needed in relation to the hardware stores. Are they exempted at present? And even machinery stores, are they exempted? And so then come to Kerry and the importance of the tourism industry and hotels and restaurants and guest houses and bed and breakfast, and indeed pubs. They're asking that he apply a zero-rate VAT for the rest of this year to ensure that they get, if they can, and if you're going to give them the green light to open, and to give them assistance in relation to their buildings and the way they present their premises for people coming in. And we realise that we won't have any foreign visitors, and we're depending on local people around the country when the thing opens up to get these people going and to get a turnover again in each of their ventures. Bus companies for school children's transport. I don't know if you realise at all, you're saying that the schools are going to open in June, for those going to doing the leaving set. There is a serious problem about transporting children, and maybe you're talking about opening the schools in urban areas, but the children in rural areas are entitled to get to school as well. And there's going to be a problem with the buses and the size of the buses that's needed for the social distancing that's required. And it's very important that and I know that no interaction has taken place up until now, that he interact with the bus companies and bus Éireann as to how the children are going to be brought to school for the remaining term of this year, in order to, and seeing as he wouldn't relent and let forget about the leaving set for this year. He must realise now that there's a serious problem about bringing children to school, and it needs to be discussed with the contractors and ensure that the children are brought safely and that they're seen after. It's very, very important. And again, in relation to the seasonal workers, it's so important. They're totally left behind, and Kerry depended so much on those workers. Most of them now, their stamps have run out. In the next couple of weeks, their stamps, all of their stamps will be gone. It concerns hotel workers, pub workers, it concerns bus drivers. And like Michael said about the bus companies, there's a yard of buses parked in Killarney. It will cost millions of euros to fund what's gone into that yard, and they're all parked. But every one of those buses had a driver, and maybe two drivers. And all of those drivers now are not getting paid a cent. They've been left behind. It's wrong. I'm sorry to say.
Deputy, the time is up now. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Point of order, yes.
Through the ethics that you're supposed to declare a possible conflict with some of the through a connected person. Right. You're supposed to mention that, and I know I'm doing that. And
I'm sorry, I must.
We have to declare.
I have two buses. Honestly, that's what I have,
and it's just doing the thing properly. We have to declare.
Thank you, Deputy. And of course, I have a pub, like all the others.
We know that. We've heard about it.
And there needs to be a roadmap. There needs to be a roadmap, Minister, for publicans and their lives all around the country, because it looks like that many of them won't be reopening, but for the ones that will try to, there needs to be a roadmap put in place, and they need to be told when roughly they will get to open their doors again.
Reopening Kilgarvan anyway. Now, since we didn't get to respond to those questions, you might consider a written response, Minister, if you can, if that's possible. No, we don't. You took all the minutes that were available. Now we move on to the independent group. Who, Deputy Catherine Connolly?
So,
yes.
Minister, I'm hoping to ask 3 specific questions, and you might answer them, and I'll put them as quickly as I can. The 3 questions, 2 are very practical questions. What engagement has your department had with the Department of the Gaeltacht in relation to the aftermath of the decision to close the Irish colleges, affecting 40 colleges, 700 families and 27,000 students? And I don't think, my question, I understand from replies to Dáil questions, Minister, that you were going to look at adapting the existing packages in relation to picking up the consequences of that. Number 2, the question is in relation to protective equipment. And thank you to the Parliamentary Budget Office, which I read, and they point out that Ireland relies heavily on other countries for PPE. And my specific question to you is, given that Ireland imported €340 million more PPE products than it exported, making it the 7th largest trade deficit for PPE in the EU, what is the Department's plans, or what are the plans to make us, if not self-sufficient, to go along that road? Indeed, I have 2 masks in my bag here, and I mentioned them. I don't wish to put them out as a gimmick, but to point they're actually works of art made by a woman in Galway for a nursing home. So there's fantastic goodwill on the ground. My final question is in relation to small to medium enterprises, and you will see I've asked a question there specifically. You can read it, but in terms, I read the financial notes from the Central Bank last week, the 2 notes that came out, and they point out that non-agricultural small to medium businesses employ more than 1 million. And they point out, looking at various indices and criteria, that the requirement for liquidity is going to be between 2.4 billion and 5.7 billion. Now, they look at that in terms of the existing costs, in terms of rent, rates, utilities, and if the companies can reduce that, and then this still will be. Now, I'm a little concerned, Minister, and I welcome your department's approach to date, particularly with the help for employers. But I'm afraid your comments today that you go to the bank first, really, I think the department should read what the Central Bank had said. And I don't always agree with them, but they talk about the non-availability of loans from the bank for quite a number of these companies. And they also point out about the cascading effect from those further up the chain, not affected by COVID, because they can't supply and can't get money from the lower down. I don't mean lower down in that way, but further down the supply chain. So quite clearly, there's a need for a new roadmap in relation to how we're going to give liquidity to small businesses. Now, I come from Galway, and it's absolutely despairing to walk the streets as it is with other towns and cities, and business have been very good in complying with all of the measures that need it, but they do need hope at this point. And you mentioned the suspension of rates. We need more than the suspension of rates. We need a plan that allows the businesses to come back, but in a sustainable manner. I'll just leave you a little time to answer, because my colleague has the last 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Deputy, and thank you for raising those issues. Just to be clear, I did announce 2 weeks ago £1 billion worth of liquidity and grant supports for businesses, and there's a big long list of all the various supports that are available out there. So we are looking at another package of supports, and we will be announcing them in due course, and I'm working with Minister Donoghue on that. Of course, the first was the initial shock, and it's over £4 billion worth of supports in terms of the wage subsidy scheme and the increased pandemic unemployment payment. So that's already available, and we have to look obviously at how we can reboot companies, get them back up and running, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. We want to get businesses back and people employed, and get back to full production as quickly as possible. But it's not just going to be as easy as switching on a light. We're going to have to work with companies, and they're going to have to try and ramp up their production, but those that have gone on to the wage subsidy scheme, at least they'll have that connection with their workers. The Department of the Gaeltacht, just to say that we are engaging with the Minister Kine, the Minister for the Gaeltacht, and we're looking at the issues for Bannathy and the communities there as well. And just to say that all of the supports that are available across the board to all of the other companies are available to the Gaeltacht, to companies in the Gaeltacht area. Regarding the PPE, there's approximately 100 Enterprise Ireland companies that are producing for different products to cope with COVID-19. And only yesterday I was in Combilift in my own county. They have developed a splitter machine, which means that one ventilator can serve up to 6 patients, and you can deal with each patient individually. So that's what you call innovation, and they have written the programmes, and they've been working with the HSE over the last 4 weeks. It started off where they wanted to see how they could help, so it has now developed into a really good prototype that's been tested, working with the HSE, and they're actually looking at that this could help. We have enough ventilators in this country, but there are going to be developing countries out there that probably won't have the funding to buy maybe all the ventilators they may possibly need. So this here means 1 ventilator and 6 patients, and they can deal with each one individually. So that's an example. And Enterprise Ireland, are supporting companies right across the country in how they can change. And I had better mention Carrick Gin in Monaghan as well. They are now making hand sanitizers.
Well, thanks, Minister. And if you're mentioning Carrick, I'm going to mention Drumshanbo. But look, I want to thank you for your actions so far. And you've said many times that it's the right supports at the right time and the right place. So I just want to ask you about now. I mean, right now, many businesses, as you know, are facing a mounting wall of debt. Rent, rates, utilities bills. And they need to pay those bills now. Many of them don't want to borrow. They're already borrowed up to the hilt. And what I'm asking you is, would you consider putting in place a business interruption grant, a small grant for SMEs to cover or partly cover these expenses? Not grants for planning or training. Yes, they're important, but a business interruption grant to deal with this wall of debt. I've already asked you about the rate of interest on microfinance loans, and you responded that there is a 6-month holiday, both on repayments and on interest rate, and that's correct. But even at that, Minister, if you compare to the Netherlands, a 10,000 loan over, let's say, 3 years, you'll end up paying twice as much in interest here than you will there, without going into the detail. But what I want to ask you is, and others have spoken about it, given that the NTMA are borrowing at 0.5% interest, would you just reconsider the interest rates on microfinance? Because for those who are just thinking about borrowing, it might help them. And my final question is around tourism. And despite what Danny Healy-Rae says, as far as we're concerned in the North West, we're the jewel in the tourism crown. It certainly supports well over 40,000 jobs. And it's an industry that's going to get back slowly. People are very concerned. So my question to you, and I know this impacts on other ministers, not just you, but what specific supports do you have in mind, if any, to support the tourism industry? Thank you.
First of all, in relation to the tourism industry, I have spoken to all of the different representative bodies individually at different stages over the last week or so. And I know that Minister Ross is engaging with the hospitality sector and the tourism sector in terms of what we can do to support them, because they have been impacted more so than any other sector, I believe, whether it's the pubs, the restaurants, or indeed the hotels, and it is a very difficult time for them. In terms of interest rates, as you know, and you rightly said that the Microfinance Ireland loan is at 0%, no interest for the first 6 months. In terms of the COVID-19 working capital facility, there is an option there that you don't have to pay interest for the first 6 months on that as well, if that's what if you make that request. And the rates that are charged on the Future Growth Loan Scheme, it's a maximum. It's in around 4%. 3.5% for 250,000. That's the long-term loan, and those rates are very competitive in the marketplace. In terms of the working capital one, they tell me that an overdraft facility generally costs you around between 7 and 8%. Depends, of course, what you're, on the bank. But this is at 4%, and we felt that it represented good value in the marketplace. But I take your point, and of course these are things that we are continually looking at to see how we can make them better and make them more easily accessible to businesses, because as I've said here on a number of occasions, what we all want to do is to get these businesses back up and running as quickly as we can, and get people back to work as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Okay, Gormagat Irish Creaconis le Roches on Eric Gno Fionter agus Nualiachta agus Keshin agus Fragri, Mother le Takiacht Gno or Yaul COVID in Nideg. With the Reaganish, Igaun Kuigna made Goody and Kate Overella. We proceed in the next 5 minutes to statements by the Minister for Health and questions and answers on COVID-19. We stand suspended for just 5 minutes.